Just after 3 p.m. yesterday, the jury in the Lauren Dickerson trial reached its verdict. They'd been deliberating since early afternoon on Monday, and they reached a majority verdict, which is a verdict agreed to by all except one juror, and can only occur if the four-person state's an open court. There is no probability of the jury reaching a unanimous verdict. So 11 people agreed, one person did not. Thus, they were able to reach a majority verdict and found the 42-year-old woman guilty of murdering her 3 young children in a case that really did shock the country, I think. I don't think that's an overstatement. Dickerson never denied killing her children, 6-year-old Liane, 2-year-old twins Maya and Carla, in September 2021. But she pleaded not guilty to murder, claiming she was in such severe mental distress that she could not be held criminally responsible for her actions. I really feel for the jury in this trial. It must have been grueling, sitting there listening day in, day out to the details of such a dreadful case, and the judge made mention of that when he discharged them. There's talk of an appeal, but as it stands, Dickerson will face a life sentence for the murder of each child. And adjunct professor of law at Massey University, Chris Gallivan, who was on the Mike Hosking Breakfast this morning, says when it comes to sentencing, aggravating factors will be taken into consideration.
As we may or may not know, that it's life imprisonment. There's a presumption now these days for life imprisonment. It's not mandatory for murder, but she will get life imprisonment, I dare say. Then the question comes down to the minimum non-parole period. So often when we have murder cases, there will be talk about years, and people might go, what on earth is that about? Haven't they got life imprisonment? She get life imprisonment. The question now comes about how long will it be before she's eligible for parole? The base level is 10 years, but there are a number of aggravating factors under the Sentencing Act that can bump that up, and she ticks the box of many of those, Mike. And I think we're probably looking at, potentially up to 30 years of minimum non-parole period.
Really? Well, I guess we'll find out when the judge completes his sentencing. But there are so many questions and issues that arise from this case that are greater than this case as well. First of all, Dickerson is not remanded in custody in prison. Instead, she's under a compulsory treatment order at Hill Morton Hospital, where she has been since the days after the murders. The judge who presided over the case, Justice Mander, is seeking expert reports on her mental state and to help him decide what sentence would be appropriate for her. You'd have to say the public at large wouldn't be at risk, would they? This is not somebody I would lie awake at night wondering if they're going to come crawling in through my window and unleashing havoc. Should the case have been heard in front of a judge alone, given the expert testimony upon which both the Crown and defence relied so heavily, both diametrically opposed to one another too? Are our laws still fit for purpose? Chris Gallivan, in the interview with Mike this morning, says our laws are a dog's breakfast around murder. Should we have degrees of murder? To understand that not all murders are committed with the same forethought, with the same set of circumstances. And then there's the question of how anyone in the world can be allowed to endure 17 rounds of IVF. I know of women who've undergone 2 rounds and found it physically and psychologically grueling. Like, absolutely, their worlds were altered. But 17 rounds, even if you demand it and ask for this, how can anyone say, yes, okay, that's absolutely fine? And these, anyway, I think in this country we have limits on how many rounds of IVF women can endure. And when it comes to juries, who is serving on our juries? A colleague was up for jury duty recently and was asked to prepare for an 8-week trial. And she managed to get off it because she simply could not afford it. There is no way she could afford to take that amount of time off work. We've talked about this in the past. We've talked about the fact that it's increasingly difficult for people to get the time to be able to afford to serve on a jury. Do we need to have a rethink about how we select jurors? Do we have a panel of professional jurors? This is something that's been talked about before too, as have degrees of murder. But so many questions after this case has come to an end. If indeed it has, there may well be an appeal, because that's certainly what the defence lawyers indicated.